Hello there, my name's Gina Gardiner and I'm very pleased to be joining you today and looking at the theme of boundaries and how they work or they don't work for you, and what are the impacts when you have a problem with either setting boundaries, keeping to them, and what are they? I'm an international best-selling author. I'm also an empowerment and relationship coach, and I work strategically with businesses, helping them to be more profitable, to get the best out of their people, and to enable everybody to have a better work-life balance. And one of the themes that comes up regularly, and it's actually come up through several of the feedbacks from the previous Facebook Lives I've done, has been around boundaries. For me, boundaries are when you set in place expectations, things so that people know exactly what's expected of them and how to behave and what's not acceptable. And if you think about it, our life is governed by boundaries. Boundaries when we're children in terms of those that our parents create, when we'll go to bed, for example, whether we'll do our homework. Then you go to school, and there are very clear boundaries in most schools, and certainly schools where they're going to have good discipline, there are going to be very clear boundaries. When you go to the world of work, once again, there are boundaries set. The government set boundaries in terms of you paying your tax, and society sets boundaries in terms of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. When there are clear boundaries in place, people then have a choice whether or not they sit within those boundaries or whether they test them. And what I'd like to do today is to explore the whole issues of boundaries and why is it that so many people find it difficult to actually set up in the first place and maintain boundaries, particularly with their other half, with their children, with their colleagues, with their boss or with their team. And as a result, life becomes very tricky. Sorry about the noise. It's been so hot all day. I've had the doors open and suddenly there's a bit of a breeze, so the doors are creaking. I think I need a bit of WD-40. So let's put it into the context of parents and their children first and foremost. When I was at school, parents would often say to me, how is it that when the children are at school, they're well behaved, they're polite, and when they come home, they're little rotters? And I would suggest to parents it's because the boundaries are very clear. The children know exactly what they can and can't do, and they can dance along the edge, but as soon as they get a crossover, they get nobbled. They learn that every action that they take has consequences. So if you do what's expected of you and you work within those boundaries, then there's lots of nice things happen. If you step over the boundary and that you don't do your work, that you are late, that you're rude, that you're aggressive, whatever that might be in terms of the school, then there will be consequences, and those consequences won't be so nice. So you'll be given a detention. You will have to give up something that you'd like to do in terms of out of school things, that you will have extra work to do, that you'll be separated from the children. And it's very, very clear, cause, effect, quite direct, black, white. Do it this way, this is the result. Now, when I was working with my staff, the same thing applied. The expectations were very clear, and they were set out right from the advert and then through the interview. Those of you who've listened to me before will know that part of what I would say to people is, look, if you want to come here, this is a two-way interview. It's got to be right for you and it's got to be right for us. So don't come here if you don't want to work hard, if you don't want to be a good team member. Don't come here if you're moody. Don't come here if you don't want to learn. Don't come here if you don't want to support your colleagues in their learning. Because if you do come here, the expectation is that you will work hard and work hard to the common good, that you will want to learn, and I'll do everything that I can to support that learning. That whatever's going on in your private life, whatever your hormones are doing, actually we expect you to be respectful, polite, and there is no acceptance at all of aggression. And if we want the children to show less aggression, and I worked in an area which had quite a lot of latent aggression, if you, as a professional adult, don't model the behaviour that we want, then we're lost. The first adult member of staff who shows aggression, when we're talking about a zero tolerance of it, then not only are you lost, but we're all lost. So those things were set up very, very clearly. And the first time that people that didn't actually comply with those boundaries, those expectations, then they were talked to. Do you remember what we said at the interview? Do you remember what we said in your induction and throughout our ongoing training? That's not acceptable. And so we need to look forward to find a way of your fitting in, which means that you do comply with the boundaries. Now, if I think about all of the people that I work with in terms of businesses, one of the most common problems is that the boundaries aren't set clearly, the expectations. For me, boundaries and expectations, the two words are synonymous. They're not set up clearly, they're not shared so that both parties understand exactly what's needed. Then somebody does something outside the boundary and nothing is said. It's let go, and it's let go, and it's let go. And the leader, the boss, the manager, the colleague gets more and more irritated, but says nothing until there's reaches crisis point. There's a big explosion, and then there's usually some sort of row. Now, if you confronted the issue early on and did it in a very nice, professional but firm way, the chances are it would have never grown that bad. And what happens is that when we allow people to keep breaking the boundary, that we become complicit in the very behaviours that we want to change. So I was talking to a client this morning, and she was talking about some of the pressures that she has at work, and was pointing out that one of the problems is that there was a member of staff who was very moody, that they were, depending on how they were feeling, they were sarcastic or cutting. And the boss was allowing that to happen. And in the allowing of that, they were complicit because they were saying, in effect, that behaviour's okay, because they weren't saying or doing anything about it. So I would really urge you to have a great think about how often do you become complicit in the very behaviours that you want to avoid. Another example, different client, was talking about how in her organisation, the deputy phoned the leader of the group up to get them into work on time. And it was impacting on the fact that people were now coming to her rather than going to the boss, because the boss was never there and they knew that she did it anyway. But she was saying nothing to the senior managers because she didn't want to get anybody into trouble. But the result was that her health was suffering because she was getting very stressed and worried about what should she do and what would happen if, and actually it was time to create a new way of behaving, which to say to her immediate boss, look, I've covered for you, but I can't cover for you anymore. Buy yourself an alarm clock. I am not responsible for getting you into work in the morning. You're responsible. Now, that's a pretty unusual situation, isn't it? Normally it would be the other way around, the boss saying to a member of staff, what time do you call this? It's time that you got yourself up, get yourself an alarm clock and get in. And in many ways, those boundaries, although not always easy to set up and to follow through on, I think everybody can see that those are boundaries which are fairly straightforward in the sense that you can see why they're there and the benefit of sticking to those boundaries. But let's put this into the context of work-life balance. What are the sort of boundaries that you have around your work-life balance? And I have to say, I'm guilty probably more so than most people, in terms of letting my work actually encroach upon my personal life. And for me, the reason for that is that when I'm working, I don't feel at all disabled. When I'm working, it's something I love and something I want to do. But when I'm not working, then the activities that I can do are bound by my physicality, and the sort of things that I might want to do, I don't always have the energy or the strength to do those. What's your excuse? How often do you use your mobile phone to check your emails, to take phone calls, to message people in the evenings and weekends? Do you take your work computer and look at your work emails when you're on holiday? I would suggest to you that that is eroding family life. If I had a partner and I had children, then I would have to consider the impact that my behaviours were having on them. In reality, the only impact that my work-life balance is having is on me. But let me give you a couple of examples from other clients. I was working with a senior owner director of a large manufacturing firm, and we were talking about life in general and work-life balance. And he was saying that he found it very difficult because he was working at home at night. His small children wanted to play, and he kept on saying to them, "No, I'm busy. No, I'm busy." His wife was on her iPad doing Facebook and other things like that. And he suddenly recognized that the children were growing up and he and his wife were growing apart. And we talked in some detail about, what is it he wanted out of life. And he wanted to have a good relationship with his children, and he wanted to have a loving relationship with his wife. And so what we talked about was setting boundaries for the technology and for work, so that they talked to his wife and they put a moratorium on electronics, a watershed, after which they were not going to have their phones or their iPads or their computers on. They were actually going to play with the children, put them to bed together, and then have an evening. I'm old enough to remember when you had a phone, if you were lucky, and that was in the hall on a wire. And when you got home from work, you got home from work. If you wanted to send any sort of correspondence, you had to write a letter. These days, many people receive e-bombs. I don't know if you're familiar with that expression, but that's when the boss has finally got round to telling you off and sends it in an email. And it's particularly pertinent if you work in an international firm where your colleagues in America or Australia are working it on a different time zone to you. So people would wake up, switch on their email, and a bit like out of Harry Potter, the email would burst forth, and the first thing they'd see in the morning would be an unpleasant, aggressive email. Now, in the past, a letter would have to be drafted, it would have to be typed, it would have to be posted. There was time to cool down. And so there was an opportunity to put things into perspective. But with text and with emails, not only is there a problem with the boundary in terms of timing, but a boundary in terms of what's acceptable and how you frame things. And there are ways of telling people off that neither diminish them or make them feel that they are of no value, but still get the point home. So think about, where are the boundaries for you in terms of work and life? Where are the boundaries in terms of technology? They all have an off button. And it's a really useful thing to actually school yourself to do it. One of the problems that was on the news this morning about technology is there is something addictive about it. According to the news this morning, on average, people look at their phone every 12 minutes. For a very large percentage of people, it's the first thing they do in the morning. Before they have a cup of tea, before they get up and go to the bathroom, they look at their phone. People are so busy worried about what other people will think, about missing things, that they actually miss out on living in the moment. So if you want a great quality of life, if you want to be happy and successful and fulfilled, one of the things that is important is to recognize that this moment is the only moment you truly have. Worrying about what's gone, what's coming, isn't going to help if you don't actually enjoy the now. And so, if you're so busy filming something that's going on that you don't actually enjoy the moment, I think you need to consider what boundaries you put in place in terms of technology and in terms of what you want to get out of life. Let's think about boundaries now in terms of, how often you are able to maintain your personal boundaries. And I think this is probably the one which people find the stickiest to do. The being able to say no graciously rather than put yourself under huge pressure. And why is it that people do that? And I would suggest that very often it's because their sense of self-worth and confidence is poor, and that they feel if they do say no, that people won't like them, that they will be lesser, that they'll be putting somebody else out. And yet the very people who are asking for them to do something will often be the last people to offer help if you're under pressure. So what boundaries do you put in place? And if you're finding it very, very difficult to say no and do it graciously, and I'm talking about when's appropriate, you don't say no for the sake of it. But let me give you a couple of examples that have been brought to me this week by different clients. One, a very, very busy executive who works extremely long hours, who was asked by her mother if she could do something for her in the house. And it was an hour and a half's drive to the mother. The mother was able-bodied. There was no problem that her mother was in any way really vulnerable. And this client was really struggling to say no to her mum. And what she was worried about was the fallout, because her mum was quite demanding, and if she didn't do what she was asked, then there would often be a sulk or a row. And I talked about, how long was she prepared for this to go on? And if she was, then she had two choices: to let it go on and change the way she responded to that, thinking, she's my mother, I love her, I will do whatever it takes. Or what she was doing, which is to say yes and then resent it and feel frustrated about it. So it became a double whammy. So we talked about different ways to manage it. And one of the things that I suggested to her is, if she had a particularly busy week, to say to her mum at the weekend, and she always went to see her mum at the weekend, look, mum, next week's really, really busy. So have a think while I'm here, and any of the jobs you want me to do, let me do them now, because I won't have time between now and next weekend. So that then if her mum phoned during the week, unless of course it was an absolute emergency, and her mum said, I need whatever it was doing, she could say, but do you remember I said this is going to be a really busy week? I'll happily do it for you on Saturday, but I can't do it now. And I would say that that preparation in terms of having something that you can say that you feel is appropriate and right really helps in the moment, because that's what often happens, that we say yes because we don't quite know how to say no. Some examples. Another client, she was asked to pick up a friend's children from school. Now, she'd already arranged to have her own children picked up by somebody else because she had a meeting. But when the friend said to her, will you pick my children up, she found it very difficult to say no. And what she actually did was to rearrange her meeting, cancel the arrangement she had for her children, and went and picked her children and the friend's children up. Now, again, it was not an emergency. If it had been a dire emergency, different. And this was a friend who often asked her to pick children up, but rarely offered to pick her children up. And so the sort of thing that we rehearsed that she could say another time was, I'd absolutely love to, but on this occasion, I'm really sorry I can't. I've got my own children being picked up, I'm at a meeting, But another time, if you give me a bit of notice, I'd love to help you then. So recognizing where there are patterns of behavior where people don't sit within the boundaries that you think are reasonable, I think it's important that you decide whether or not you're going to put up with it or whether you're going to do something about it. And if you're going to choose to do something about it, then rehearse it in your head at least, so that when it happens, and if it is a pattern of behavior, of course it's going to happen, so that you can say, actually, do you know what? On this occasion, I can't. So let's look at the example where your boss comes to you and says, I need you to do this. And you've already got an incredibly heavy load. And you say to your boss, well, what a lot of people do is say yes and fume and feel aggrieved, but stay late or take work home. But one of the things you can say to your boss is, I'd love to, but can you have a look at the priorities I've got and let me know which are your priorities, because I haven't got time to do all of them within the time frame, so I need a steer from you. That gives the boss the opportunity to say, well, okay, let that go in order to do this, or actually, I'll find somebody else to do it. But if you just sit and put up, then people will continue to dump on you. Being able to set appropriate boundaries is about having a sense of self-value, that your time, your energy, your money, you can only use once. And if you're consistently sorting other people's stuff out and not looking after yourself, then you're going to become frazzled, you're going to become emotionally depleted and physically incredibly tired. It'll have an impact on your immune system, and eventually you'll be poorly. Now, I'm not talking about being precious with yourself, but I am talking about looking after yourself first, using the overflow to help other people. People who are always helping others rather than dealing with their own stuff are either trying to deflect from their own stuff, or they're not giving themselves the same value as they give others. So imagine a jug that you fill with water, and eventually, if you keep filling it, it will begin to overflow. Use the overflow for other people. Fill yourself up first. If you don't look after yourself, then you're not going to be able to help anybody else. And this is particularly true if you are a very, very busy person. And I know from working with clients that women, generally speaking, have to take the responsibility for children and their work. Not always, but generally. They are generally the people who take responsibility for elderly parents. So you have to look after yourself if you are going to then have the energy and the ability to look after other people. So setting boundaries around your own energy, time and money is really, really important. If you need some help, please let me know. Now, one of the reasons for doing these Facebook Lives, I'm in the process of doing a 30-day challenge. What I want to do is to help people recognize that, with some simple techniques, that life can be so much easier, that life can be even better. I have a big mission, and my mission is to positively impact on 1 million people within the next 5 years, to help them step into their power, to live life fearlessly, and to be able to then not only help themselves, but to help other people, to become the spiritual matriarchs and patriarchs who will lead their family, their work, their community in a way which models a very much more compassionate, caring and inclusive way of being. I'd love your help. So please share these videos. Let people know that they can get a free digital download of the latest best-selling book, Thriving Not Surviving, The 5 Secret Pathways to Happiness, Success and Fulfillment. And you can find that as a free digital download from the website, genuinely-you. If you'd like to be part of a group of people who are like-minded, who also want to grow and develop and to have the confidence to live a happy and fulfilling life, then try out the Thrive Together Tribe membership, and you can try it out for $1 for a month. And that's got interactive video sessions twice a month. It's got a structured program of self-development, including videos, activity books, a themed journal. There's loads and loads of resources there that you can dip into as and when you need. And there's a very active Facebook group that provides support, challenge and celebration, where you can be valued for who you are, no judgment. So thanks for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Take care. Bye now.